Hello, everyone, and a huge thank you for joining us today for a discussion on supporting engineer teams through times of growth. This is a lead dev webinar creating partnership with Pluralsight. The webinar will last roughly 45 minutes, after which both myself and the panelists will head over to the lead dev Slack to answer some of your questions in the scaling channel. We might also have time to answer a couple of questions live, so please do submit those through the Q&A feature in Zoom, and we will get to them if we can towards the end. So let's get started with some introductions. My name is Raul Hepser, and I'm EM at Spotify. And today I will be joined by Tripta Gupta, Leon Zhao, and Austin Bagley, that they will share their experiences and insight on this topic. I will ask each of you to introduce yourselves. So we can start with Tripta, please.
All right. Hi, I'm Tripta. I am an engineering manager over at Braintree out in the Bay Area. I've been in engineering for about 8 years now and excited to be here.
Nice, thank you. Leon.
All right, I'm Leon. I'm the head of business operation for engineering group at SAP SuccessFactors. We're also out in the Bay Area. So for me, in the past, I've worked at all sizes of companies, from startup, mid-size to large companies. And I've also worked as a developer, a manager, and consultant, and as a leader. So I think this variety of experience really helped me develop my empathy towards this role, and also my career-long fascination towards organizational behavior is really realized here. So I'm very lucky to be here talking about one of my favorite topics.
Hey, I'm Austin. Oh yeah. Hey, I'm Austin Bagley. Also excited to be here today. This is a lot of fun. I'm a developer advocate here at Pluralsight. I work on the Flow product team. So this is a team that actually spends all of our time helping leaders use data and metrics to drive more objective decision-making and more inclusive leadership. And so that's kind of where we come from, and happy to be here today.
Great. Thank you very much, you all, for being here and also for your introductions. So we can start with some questions around the topic of growing in times of uncertainty. Considering these kind of times when the organization is scaling up so much and also the engineer teams are growing, what are the top 2 items you always prioritize? Can you share a little bit more with us, Leon, about that?
Yeah, of course, Raul. I'll take on that question. I think the first reaction from a lot of people is really just get into the DevOps mindset, right? Work on your technical debt and really work on automating everything. Because that's really how, when we look at a big company, that's how they scale, right? So I really want to focus on 2 things that I think really stands out, besides from adopting the general DevOps mindset. So really one of them is you got to work on your HR processes, because people is usually your most important asset as you scale up, right? So once they're really past the Dunbar limit of about 150 people, people stop really getting to know each other as much as they would like to. There are always people that you run into that you have never met before, right? It's very important as you develop your people asset, you bring procedural justice and meritocracy to the process. That really means, you want to look at people's metrics, the artifacts that things they have to work on, and really do the calibration across different teams to help people understand where they are, where each individual is in the organization. This way, the real high performers, they'll stick around, they'll grow with the organization, and you get to keep your most important assets, right? In this case, a tool that provides individual level metrics would really help with a lot of this decision making. The second thing I want to talk about is really the importance of business architecture, and it's often overlooked. What happens here is, as companies grow, there always be things that's more interesting and less interesting. There always be the organic sprout of the architecture that don't really fit the product needs. And what this brings is you not only have ownership conflicts where people are working on competing capabilities, but you also have a lot of dependencies across different teams. So when customer have an issue, you end up bringing every single team into a war room, and those are your best people. You take them off their work and work on something, right? So it's important to have that architecture from top down and look at it once in a while and figure out how to optimize, how to have clean ownership, clean dependencies as you scale up.
Yeah, that's a very good two topics. On both, I've seen myself so many times. Like we were like a small company, and then after 3 years, I don't know most of my colleagues. And then exactly about, I really appreciate that you brought this topic of like how the systems change and how the teams have now to support the scaling up of the engineers in the organization, especially like for example in infrastructure teams, as you mentioned. Austin and Tripta, do you have anything to add? Jashatsky, like we can.
I'll let Tripta go first.
Yeah, sure, please.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of, yeah, I just want to echo, I guess, what Leon said, that what brought the engineers there in the first place, I think also is important. What brought that team together in the first place as you scale, because it's easy to, as you're scaling the organization, to lose sight of like what was sort of the core of that organization, what were the values that were upheld when it was a smaller team, but as you start to grow larger. And for me, at least when we're hiring or an organization that I'm a part of is growing, I think like bringing that into the interview process and those core values, like trying to keep them continual throughout whatever we're working on or whatever processes we're trying to expand, for me is kind of something that I always try to prioritize.
Yeah, I have a very similar comment to Tripta. I think as the teams grow, you've kind of gone from this status of really close to the customer just by default, by necessity, and then as engineering teams get more specialized, larger, every individual engineer is further from that kind of that customer. Like, what are we actually delivering? What are the wins? How are we making their lives easier? And so it really puts the the need of engineering leaders have to now help their engineers connect what they're doing to all the awesome things that customers are experiencing. So that's wins, that's progress, that's the metrics. That needs to be a critical part of scaling, because if you don't, then you kind of lose that. I mean, that's why we show up, right? We want to go and actually change people's lives. And so we need to make sure we're still connected to that.
Yeah, exactly. Great. Thank you very much. I would like to go a bit more in terms of what you shared a bit, Tripta, about, like what is holding us together? What's the vision? So in terms of changing the team's mission and vision, they might also change very often, right? How do you keep the team focused on their goal, even if you cannot count on a fixed strategy and mission, consider like long-term, medium-term?
Sorry, can you repeat that last part of that question?
Yeah, like how do we keep the team focused on their goal, even when we cannot count on a fixed strategy and mission?
Oh, yeah. So I think at least when I face this issue, I think again focusing on what the team has created that's sort of in motion, that's already being done, that's well. Like so the team that I'm currently a part of is a disputes team, and the way that Braintree does disputes versus the bigger, larger company that we're part of, PayPal, does disputes is completely different. And so we're facing this this situation where what domain that we were kind of doing well looks very different as we grow and become a part of a larger organization. So for us, we're kind of focused on like, where can we trim like access functionality within our domain that wouldn't be applicable, and kind of focus on what is the core thing that we're doing. I think also addressing any sort of technical debt, engineering debt, and keeping that sort of in mind when we have to like renew our mission or vision. If we had a sort of a green field, how would we have done better? What can we bring forward that that we have done well in our projects in the past? So that's some way to keep the team focused, and sort of, you're not like kind of moving them into a completely new vision, but still retaining the good parts, or the stuff that we still think should like be alive and well and can move forward.
Right.
Yeah, I just want to add to that. I think the way Tripta addresses her team is perfect, because she does convey the authenticity of how leadership should convey the product and the direction the team is going, right? Because oftentimes, why do organizations or business change the focus or change the strategy is because not everything is perfect. There's always new things coming up. There's lack of foresight or failures that we need to address quickly, right? And so I think that authenticity and really openly discuss why we make those changes and why there's a shift in focus is, and avoid the make-believes, the sugarcoating, right, of things that didn't go well, because we're all really working with very smart people here, and they can see through that. Underlying everything is that you want to give the team the feeling of being appreciated, right? And no one really mind, right? If we have to throw away some work, hey, we're in this together, right?
Yeah.
What I do notice is as you scale up, this type of authenticity tends to fade in much bigger organizations. And I think the problem, and it's my theory, is that you have a lot more layers of hierarchy in bigger organizations. And if you have one person with the ego in the middle of it, then you end up with the project, the goals, the things that didn't work out get swept under the rug, right? The communication stopped there, right? But really, as a leader of a smaller team, you can still be very authentic with your team.
Right. Great. Thank you.
Small add-on. Like engineers are very, we sort of enjoy what we build, and sometimes it's hard to move forward. But just to add more emphasis to what Leon said, like as line managers in my case, and then even as you get larger, like it is, I think, part of our responsibility to not just like give them the work, but to have that conversation with the team about this is what the business, where the business would like to go in terms of the strategy or vision for what this team does, and to have that communication not just be like top down, but also bottom up, and like have engineers be a part of sort of the development of that vision, I think also helps. So just, yeah, having conversations open between, as the organization gets bigger and between those different lines, because translating it from top down and then bottom up can be difficult. But that is where I think that's where the key communication, when you're changing sort of what an individual team or group of teams is kind of focused on.
Great. We have like an interesting question from Q&A related to this topic of like how we grow, and then how we do the relationships between engineering and product, things that we have been just discussing right now. So what are your thoughts? Like the question is, what are your thoughts on the relationship between engineer and product in general, and also the engineer manager, specifically about engineer manager and product owner relationship? How this iteration would best work, pitfalls to avoid, ways to overcome friction, etc. I feel myself getting defensive when my PO gets too much involved with implementation details, bringing up solutions rather than problems, caring too much about WIP, work in progress, and generally team oversight. But maybe this isn't always a bad thing. I'm eager to hear from your advice. So do you have anything to share with this person? Yes, Austin.
Yeah, I think this is a super great question. I'm sure we all have opinions on this one. But like, I think I might be a little bit controversial in saying this, but I I think they're actually, if you have a product manager, a product owner who's actually wanting to get into some of the technical details, that overall it's a good thing that they're committed, they're in there, and they're actually trying to help. Obviously, it's not their job to go and solve it. They're there to kind of go and describe the problem, describe the user stories, describe what they're actually trying to get to. But I think I would prefer to have someone who wants to get in the weeds with me versus not. But the big pitfall, I guess, going back to that pitfall comment, is that a lot of POs do not understand the cost of all of their ideas and everything they want to change. And so we have two key metrics that we actually track here. One is called churn and one is called jitter. And they track two different things. They track how much of our code is actually getting replaced too frequently. And we track jitter, which is how much activity is happening on our Jira tickets. And so we all kind of think of like, we're agile, we want to be adaptive to customer needs, but literally we do not want to be changing things like in the middle of a sprint just for kicks, right? And so sometimes it's really difficult to show them and advocate for your team and protect your team, give your team air cover when you have a PM that's constantly changing the goalpost. And so what we've found is by using these metrics to show, hey, when we make this change, this is the result, this is how much it's costing you, and this is work we could be doing on the roadmap because we're getting down past it, that just because you want to change. And so having these two metrics help us kind of reduce the friction. There's always healthy friction, but reduce the friction and get us on a more equal playing field when it comes to, is this something we really want to address now, or is this something that really we should just have you avoid and we'll keep moving on?
Yeah. Great. I think that's also like a good segue to our next question, because this is also involving like how do we establish processes, right, to work in these new conditions like of hyper growth, of like times of uncertainty, times of changes. So most processes, they need to be changed to support this new challenge that we have just discussed. Specifically delivery, it becomes much more complex. Because as you say, obviously, like we have to put together different teams, and then and also Leon, you said we are in this area, and then we have the best people here. Let's make it work. We are on this together. But still, there is a lot of complexity here in how we put these people together, how collaboration will scale up. Can you share a little bit more about this challenge of like scaling up processes?
Yeah, let me answer that question first. I think because in my experience, there were mistakes made for sure, and there are definitely good lessons learned. And top of my mind is don't rush into best practices right away. It's really important to keep the generalist mindset open, and have people wear multiple hats and play multiple roles for as long as possible until you see the risk become intolerable, right? Because often it is what actually is creating the competitive advantage for your business, is for people to have more knowledge, have more integrated decision making, rather than adopting a rather rigid best practice because you have the fear of scaling up quickly, right? So I'll give you an example. In my early career as an engineering manager, we get to take those, we're building a product for the sports and the concert venues to do marketing there. And engineers get the opportunity to actually travel on the weekends when the product and salespeople didn't want to travel. They just give the opportunity to engineers. And we actually think those were really fun on the company's money to take a weekend trip somewhere and do a little bit of work. And what we learned from those road trips and seeing our product in action is actually tremendously helpful. And then, of course, as we scaled up, we stopped taking those trips because there's enough, economy of scale from different roles to take on those. And we sort of feel like we very much lost our connection to customers, right? There are a whole bunch of configuration changes that really like to make on the fly, but it also involves having to be able to compile the code. So we put a bunch of changes to be able to enable the delivery of the code and everything to the venue in a very close network, right? So things like that, I think are what makes companies grow and build their competitive advantage. I would really make a list of what what's keeping up at night? What are the major risks? So usually things are in the area of business continuity or change management. These are the things that you want to put a process fix in first, but don't adopt everything wholesale, without thinking through it.
Yeah, definitely. Right. Cool. Like we have been discussing a bit about the processes and then like the organization in general, like business and how this is adapt during these times of growth. But we also need to, as we talked in the beginning of the session, we also need to focus on the people, right? Like our engineers, our teams, how can also offer opportunities for them in such times. And this is our next question. Hiring can be an opportunity to grow the people, right? Through coach and mentor newcomers, like you were bringing in more junior engineers in a team with more seniority, etc. This is all related to our hiring strategy. So how do you plan your hiring in times of growth? And how do you align that plan with people's development? Tripta, could you share a little bit of your thoughts around that?
Yeah. So I think answering this is a little multifaceted. One is, depending on, how large of a team and group that you're managing, whether you're a line manager, director, VP, etc. I think it's always important to know how do the people on your team want to develop? What are their aspirations? What direction do they want to take their careers at this company and also elsewhere in the future? And so in terms of hiring in times of growth, if you're in the fortunate position to work at a company where you are always able to hire or always always are looking, I think hiring, and then on the flip side, like attrition, is actually a great, it's like change can be turbulent, whether it's growth or whether it's sort of like a backward step. But I think it's all about perspective and how you frame it to your team. So if you have sort of like a problem with attrition happening, now that people are vaccinated, I think a lot of organizations and companies are seeing this, where folks who delayed a career change are kind of doing that now, or have like a little bit more bandwidth to start interviewing around. And for me, I think it's all about framing it to the team as, well, now that this senior engineer has left, what can you do to now you have space to grow to alongside, or you have space to grow the skills that you've been wanting to focus in on and that you may have not had the space to kind of go toward. But then also, if you have maybe a more senior focused team, how can we continue to mentor junior folks to help bring them up? So again, have that sort of top down and bottom up model of like, we should all be sort of growing together, whether it's a senior engineer kind of being, exhibiting more leadership, mentoring, coaching for more junior engineers, or vice versa. And I think when I'm planning for hiring, it's always about identifying what gaps are there. And then on top of that, knowing what is our product roadmap for this year? What is our organization's sort of vision for the next 18 months? And then thinking about like, at the very least, I would like to have one senior engineer by end of this year, versus like I'm willing to take on, maybe more like intermediate level in the next 12 months. So it's a lot of, to conclude all of that was more of like knowing where people want to develop it, but then also knowing where your product roadmap is going, and then aligning the two so that what like a healthy size team is for your domain or what your product roadmap looks like, and always sort of moving toward that, and then altering as it, if there's any changes that happen there. I also think one other way to sort of help with this, at least in terms of attrition and retention, is that, there's only so much that we can control while we have a team together. But in terms of like, if there are 3 or 4 projects that a team is working on in any one time, to sort of encourage more pair programming, have have that mentoring coaching. It doesn't have to be like a formal opportunity, but like have people try to work together on projects, so that if someone else were to come into the picture, or someone were to leave, that we're not addressing any negative issues by any sort of subject matter expertise leaving. I know that kind of goes a little bit further away from your hiring point, but I wanted to kind of include that because I think hiring happens when attrition happens a lot of the time. So yeah, those are my thoughts.
Like those things happen all the time, and then in those times we cannot choose what to do. We'll never have this perfect scenario where we can hire, right? Like in like not a less turbulent moment. Thanks for your comment. And like that is also connected to, you said something very important, and I think that's the point as well. How do we bring those engineers into the discussion, right? How to hear them. So we also need to understand their aspirations, and then also they have to understand their own aspirations. And can you share a little bit more about the tools that you have used? How do you plan to help them to reach the goals, to first of all also find those goals, find these aspirations that they have? Because sometimes in times of like, as I usually say, there's like a controlled chaos. People get lost easily. Engineers get lost easily. They will look for first make their PRs, make their code, but they will forget a little bit, or they will be a bit less focused on their own personal development.
Yeah. Go ahead, Tripta.
I guess for aspirations, I think for me, on the sort of the non-concrete side, I try to understand like what brought them to this company. Were there certain skills that they had that they want to utilize? Was there something about the environment, like a small company, bigger company, that appealed to them? On top of that, like, do they have an interest in the product, like on a deeper level? What are the reasons, like sort of understand before like moving to aspirations, which is future thinking, kind of understanding a little bit backwards, but who the person is, what brought them there. So that's more of like what I try to understand during one-on-ones. But in terms of like concrete, like, maybe writing down, I try to encourage folks on my teams and other teams to start journaling. I worked on this project. How did it make me feel? Was I excited about it? Was I inspired by it? Some people have a very clear idea of like where they want to take their career, but knowing myself from 10, 15 years ago, I went in a very different direction than what I thought 10, 15 years ago, or where I thought my life would look like now. So I think it's more about bringing self-awareness to their everyday projects, to knowing what excites them, what inspires them, what doesn't excite them, and then kind of planning toward that, at least in terms of what I can control in projects that I give them. And then also, just journaling. I think I found that useful for myself. We do like end of year reviews and all of that, but for me, I find journaling more of like, I kind of think about like, there's just something that I have to do and I really hate doing this. Like, how can I avoid doing this in the future? Like, how can I shape my career to not have to do these things that I don't enjoy, but like try to do more of the things that that actually inspire me. So using that same strategy on them. I think, Leon, did you want to add some?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, actually, I thought you covered the aspiration aspect very well. What I find there are definitely a set of people that is very risk averse when it comes to their careers. And I think, like early on in the career, it makes a lot of sense that taking some risk is always very, very rewarding for a lot of people, especially the high performers. They always shine everywhere. But what I really want to add is the toolkit that we have to, develop and help people reach their goals. Is we're very specific about, what we call SAP talk, how we provide feedback to people. You we want to really get away from sugarcoating the negatives, want to get away from sandwiching the negatives in the middle and on a high note. We want our managers to get into a habit of be very clear about what their opinions about the employees are doing and how they form that opinion. And this way, you're giving the subject the opportunity to explain him or herself why they're being perceived in such a way and what difficulty they're facing, so that manager can step in and help them and create those opportunities for them to reach their goals, right? And I think this really isn't about whether or not employees have the humility to take this very honest feedback, but it's more about the humility of the managers to be exposed about their thought process and allow themselves to be questioned whether their opinion is correct and how they can do better with their job. So once you adopt that mindset, you know, managers, then they are truly the people manager, the enablers of the employees.
Yeah, thank you. We have talked a lot about, yeah, like giving opportunities and then, helping to grow those engineers. We see like engineers going, from like more junior engineers and then towards senior staff engineer, but also there are those cases of engineers that once they are in the company, after a while, they get exposed to some like leadership, and then they got really excited about it. So they decided to move from the IC track to the management track, leadership track. So my question, Austin, maybe you can start that discussion. How do we create the space and the opportunities for people to exercise these leadership skills so that they will be ready when the change, like when they decide to change their tracks?
Yeah, no, for sure. I like that question a lot. And there's also some really cool questions in the Q&A that we can touch on too.
Exactly, like right after this one.
After this, we'll jump into that too.
Yeah.
So I think the first, like I'll talk about like this in terms of principles. Like the first principle, and we've kind of mentioned, you kind of alluded to that, is there should not be an expectation that if I want to become better in my career and paid better in my career, that I need to be a people leader. You want to be able to develop and help people who want to be technically proficient. And there's ways to lead as a principal, as a senior engineer that is highly valuable to your company. And so that's the first thing, is you want to make sure that set expectation is, because what you don't want is people who are jumping into leadership because they want to be paid more, and that's the only way of getting that done.
But they think that's a promotion, right? Which is not a promotion, but it's just like changing the roles. Yeah, I get it.
Yeah, so that's like the first thing. But then kind of once you got past that hurdle, the second thing is, how can I help these individuals who want to kind of get into this, really understand, get into it, and do it in a probably less risky way. There's like kind of two things that have worked well for us, and they're pretty similar. The first one is we call it the rotating lead concept. So we have self-managing teams, and we actually have individual engineers take lead on all the ceremonies for a set amount of time. And so they're not doing HR, they're not doing hiring, firing, they're not doing any of that kind of stuff, but they are there to help the team and really work on the culture of the team. And ultimately, they're responsible for the value they deliver during that time period. So it's a great chance, and it's fun to kind of have that rotation change. And really out of that, you really should hopefully get an idea as an IC thinking about leadership, if this is something that feels right for me. The second one, which is a little more committed, is the notion of a player coach. One of the things I highly recommend is not doing this yo-yo where you go from being 100% engineer to being 100% leader. That's a really hard transition. Like, you really kind of earned your kind of reputation and your joy from the work you did. And we don't want to take that away instantaneously. And so as you structure these first-time manager roles, this player coach concept is good. And the way to do that is really being very clear and specific about where they should use their time. Now, they are going to have to allocate time. 40% typically is a good number for how much you should be allocating that time towards helping the team, but helping them retain that 60% to continue to actually jump on tickets, jump on work, jump on problems, and still have that part of their career. And so the way that works is you really help them understand how to prioritize that 40%. It is not about knocking or tapping on everyone's shoulder. What's going on? How can I help? it's really about having a good view of where your hotspots are and focusing on the things that will matter most. Obviously, I come from a place where data is core to that, to enabling that, helping you understand where things are fine, don't worry about it, where like, hey, this is where I should spend my time and provide more air cover for my team. And so that's really kind of the two things that we highly recommend with those new leaders, because we want them to kind of get in and actually have maybe an exit plan if this is not something they love. And that's okay. And that should be, you don't want to be in a place where you're losing senior engineers because they feel like they've got to be a leader or not. And so that's kind of a big thing there. But can I volunteer for a couple of these questions on Q&A, because they're cool questions?
Sure, let's go to that.
All right. So I like the question here. So Christian asked the question, when acquiring other companies and teams, how do you include these engineers in your growing company the best way? And this is a huge challenge, right? And this happens a lot. And so there's a lot of different scenarios out there, but I'll probably take one scenario specifically, and that's kind of big, mature engineering company is acquiring small, growing engineering startup. That's probably the most common, with the ultimate goal of somehow incorporating the capabilities they acquired into the master product. And so that's the scenario I'll use. Obviously, there's lots of different ones. If you're like similar size and you're gonna do different things, like things will change. But the biggest thing is something you want to avoid. And what you want to avoid is like the slow trickle of change over the course of a year and a half. That often happens because there'll be cultural change, there'll be process change, there'll be product changes. And when that happens, when you force kind of this slow trickle of change across an engineering team, it's pretty tough to have them continue to focus on what matters most with this constant change. And so the recommendation I have is when you first acquire that company is you definitely want to give it time in the status quo, keep them separate, keep the Slack channels separate, let them do the thing and really learn from them. Obviously data can help with this. Where are the best practices? We're going to learn a lot from this startup company because they're probably saddled with less tech debt. They're probably saddled with less process. There's things we wish we could do that they're doing. And we want to learn from that quickly. And then when you've kind of figured out like how the best way to integrate that is going to be, make those changes pretty much all at once. It's going to be more dramatic and you will definitely have engineers leave. But you would rather have that happen in a short amount of time versus having engineers go, hey, 6 months down the road, this isn't exactly what I signed up for. This is not what I want. You need to be really clear, honest up front with the changes you tend to make when those changes do occur so that you're not constantly putting these engineering teams in a place of uncertainty. And so that's like the main kind of principle with acquiring these companies is it's learning from them, but also being very upfront, honest, and making those changes in a short amount of time and moving on. It's pull the Band-Aid off, basically.
Yeah, great. Definitely. We also can take some like more from the Q&A quickly because it's also related to high and personal development. And then some of them are related or plus one, the journaling idea from Tripta. One of the questions about it on the subject of journaling, what are your opinions on retrospectives? Is it something you think should be done? After what events should a retrospective be done? And if like there is any if there like also this person is asking if there is any particular tools, models that you usually use for that. That's for
So,
yeah, sorry.
Yeah, I guess I can take that on. So I personally love retrospectives. The tool, the tool that you use, whatever works for your team. I don't have a recommendation. We use one that works for our team. It's called Retrium, but whatever works for your team works. I see the tool as more of just like a way to facilitate a conversation that isn't happening in any other part, if a part of at least an Agile that comes up. I think that they're essential to the team. We tend to do them at the end of every sprint, but I also encourage them to do at the end of a big project. It doesn't have to be, that way it can be kind of focused on a specific topic as opposed to all the various events that happen within 2 weeks. So the question is like, just to remind me, because I don't see it on the list, is it just like, why do retrospectives, or?
Yeah, like if like what do you think about on the topic of the journaling? What do you think about retrospective? And then when do you think they should be done? After what events, like launches, regular or company experience, etc. Yeah.
Yeah, I like them. I think it requires really good facilitation by whoever's running it, whether it's the EM or if you have like a Scrum Master or someone who runs them. I think they're essential for all the details that don't get brought up in stand-ups or other types of weekly or daily rituals with the team. I also think that they'd be great at the end of a big project. I also think that they're good after you've done sort of, if there's like an incident and you do a post-mortem. Sometimes it's hard for people to talk about their feelings, and feelings are valid and important, and they should be, at least for myself, I want to recognize that within my team. And it's a place to be very open with the team, as opposed to just between yourself and the EM or yourself and another team member. It creates sort of like, what is it? Not groupthink, but just sort of like a larger consciousness within the team.
Yeah.
And I think that they're great for a healthy functioning team. If your team misses it, I mean, it's, you know, you're welcome to kind of experiment with when you think they're applicable, but, and they take some practice to get good at. It's not like you start it, and even if you're a great facilitator, like the team is totally on board. It takes sometimes a little bit of time for the team to feel very comfortable if you have introduced it before.
Yeah, great. We're going back to Q&A soon, but first, before we end, I really would like to take a question around data, because I really believe in the power of data and how this can guide the organizations to grow and become better. So let's take that one, and then we come back to Q&A, if that's fine. So as said, like we have touched the topic about data here, you will know that we can help us to understand how the organization is growing. For example, if our internal infra support can scale up, if the engineers still feel productive, etc. So what do you think about KPIs versus metrics, and how they can guide the organization in this like healthy path to grow? Austin, Leon, you can start.
Yeah, you picked the right person, because this is like a big portion of my daily work, right? So first, let's distinguish the difference between KPI metrics. KPI is, or sometimes we call it OKR, right? Just different spin at it. It's the things that everyone want to look at and want to drive forward. So the more the better, because they indicate performance, whether it's on individual, on team, or product, right? The metrics, on the other hand, they come and go, right? They're there to support the growth of KPI and make sure the KPIs are growing in the right direction without causing additional unintended consequences or risks. So let's talk more specifically about metrics, because KPI a lot of times is really tied to the business outcome, right? So it varies. Where the metrics comes in is, first of all, there really is a maturity level of metrics. What do you focus on first and later, right? So SAP adopted Pluralsight Flow last year. And at the beginning, we really were just looking at the basics. So the code impact, commits, the very basic. Then we find out there are definitely a lot of engineers that are really don't spend a lot of time coding, but resolving tickets and inundated with other tasks, right? So that's kind of an obvious problem. Then we move on to next maturity level. We started looking at the PRs, responsiveness, and how teams are networking with each other. And those are the patterns and anti-patterns that we want to provide to the engineers, engineer managers, to help grow and develop their team. So I think overall, right, you really want to have a sense of where the problems are within the organization and solve the problem with metrics. And on the other hand, use tools like Pluralsight Flow to watch the metrics and understand where the problems are. And you create a cycle. And in this cycle, you really develop this culture of excellence as you go forward, right? So there really never is a perfect set of metrics, but it depends on, you know, what problem you are trying to solve continuously, and continuously bringing more metrics. So I was talking to a buddy at a different company. They are very mature with all development metrics. They have moved on to, you know, meeting metrics and looking at Microsoft Office workplace analytics to figure out how the meetings are impact people's context switches, and try to minimize the distraction in meetings. So yeah, so that's the gist of it.
I think we're at time, but I'll just say one thing real quick, and I love on it, is that you positioned it well. So KPIs are things that our CTO and CEO should understand. Cycle time, deployment frequency, all the things we get. Metrics are really what impacts the teams, and the way you structure that is, what can I do to empower and enable my team? Like you said, like, we're looking at meetings because we want to make sure we're not distracting engineers. Like, that should be the center of your focus. Onboarding, for instance, like we did a major study on onboarding. How can we improve that? What we discovered is, if you actually have more review comments on PRs, people onboard about twice as fast. So things like that. And so that's where metrics really can come in. Obviously, we're not going to give credit to that today in the time we have, but like, definitely encourage you to kind of search this out, figure out how to kind of go on that maturity curve that Leon is talking about. Because it will certainly unlock and help you hit those KPIs that the CTO cares about.
Great, thank you very much. Now let's have the Q&A questions that they had on like Zoom, and also like to just like remind all of you, like who is attending this webinar, you can also ask questions in the hashtag scaling Slack channel in LeadDev as well. So the questions from there, like, have you ever managed the growth of teams or engineers in a team that does not have an established engineer development track? I think this is related to like what happens with the mission and vision. Okay.
I would say create one.
Yeah, I have a quick question. Is the time?
Yeah.
Are you supposed to answer these in Slack now, or supposed to answer them live? I wasn't sure about the timing here.
Yeah, let's answer those in this like Slack channel then.
Okay, cool. Yeah, these are great questions, by the way.
Yeah, that's like very nice. So then we're going to continue there. We just like going to wrap up now. I know that was a very exciting discussion, and we have so much to talk about it, but let's continue that on the Slack channel. Thank you so much, all of you, for the insights, for the good insights, for this very interesting discussion we have in today's panel. And then, as I said, we'll all be heading over now to the LeadDev Slack channel in the hashtag scaling channel, and please head there to continue the discussion.